have had the same challenges as in Spotify and Datadog on scaling data engineering teams. But what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to add today, is the multi-tenancy problem that we have in Adevinta. So I'm going to repeat a lot of about all our tenants and how do we provide data to them. So if you ever have to build a multi-tenant information infrastructure, you've seen that it's probably a hard thing to do, delivering the data, tooling, but also delivering the business value at the same pace, right? So what are the challenges that we have encountered and what you will learn, what you will take away in this talk? So we have to build this multi-tenant information architecture for business insights at Adevinta, and we have solved some of these challenges. So this is what I'm going to explain about today. So why me? Why me explaining this to you? So I've been working in the BI and the data engineering world since 2011. First as a consultant, but then I entered Schibsted at that time as a business intelligence engineer. So, and then because at some point we have had a lot of data to process, we moved to the data engineering skill set and capabilities. So a little bit as the same story in Spotify and Datadog. So currently I'm managing a team of data engineers and data modeler in Adevinta, and again, to build an analogy with the presentation from Wouter, we are leading the foundational data team at Adevinta. So we are an horizontal team, and we are a structure to deliver data to the rest of the organization. But what is Adevinta? So Adevinta is a marketplaces specialist. It's where you go to buy and sell second-hand products. And we have different businesses around the world, and we help people to match each other when buying a car, finding a job, and moreover, we are reducing CO2 emissions, and we have some reports that say that we save 1.1 million tons of plastic and 20.5 million tons of greenhouse gases are not produced because of people not buying new stuff. So these are the brands that are part of Adevinta. We have more than 30 brands in 16 countries, mainly in Europe, but also in South America and North Africa. So if you come from the UK or Germany, you probably know about the Spock. Here in Spain, we have Fotocasa and Habitaclia, InfoJobs, Vivo, and Milanuncios and Coches.net. And you can start to sense the challenge. So how do you provide global services to this organization that they can leverage on their daily basis to succeed in their local markets? We are here in Barcelona. We have this global services organization. We have also some teams in Paris, and we are responsible for producing these global services, from recommendation to messaging service to foundational data service. So, which is the problem, right? As I said, we want to provide foundational data to our marketplaces because we want to eliminate the data quality discussions. So imagine also a company like Delivery Hero that explained yesterday a similar situation. We want our marketplaces to be able to compare between themselves. We want to have the same definition of what a session is when it comes to clickstream data, or we want to standardize when we consider that an event, a classified ad has been created or deleted. So we can compare, we can learn from each other. because our marketplaces are in different states of maturity. So it's very important for them to learn from each other. Also, from a global perspective, we are requesting a lot of data to the marketplaces, and it takes a significant amount of time for them to deliver it back to the central services. So if we can provide tools to minimize this time, then we will have succeed at our job. And at the end, and this is something that came as a byproduct, we realized that when we were working as the foundational data team, we were building some libraries, some tooling, some data infrastructure that could be reused by other teams locally, but also centrally. So at the end, we are providing a framework and infrastructure that can be extended. Let's take a step back, because this could not happen if we don't fulfill the basics of what an information architecture need to be and need to have to succeed. As I said, I've been working in Adevinta, but also in smaller companies beforehand, doing BI projects, data warehousing projects, data engineering projects. And the first and single topic or thing that we need to succeed is executive support. I've worked in very small teams and companies that had executive support when it comes to building analytics and building data infrastructure, and the projects were more successful than big corporations projects that had a lot of data, but they didn't know how to extract any value. So executive support is really key in this type of projects. Second one is to provide results sooner than later and then iterate. So you cannot spend 1 year or even half a year or even a quarter to deliver value to the organization. You need to provide value after the first couple of weeks or after the first month. And then you will iterate and you will fix. But it's really important and it's really key that you provide some quick wins at the very beginning, and probably you will need these quick wins through time as you go into 2-year, 3-year initiatives. But it's really important to deliver to the business users and deliver to your engineering teams tooling or dashboards or reports or data that they can use immediately, and gather feedback, and then you will improve. So third point is that an information architecture is not a project. Some people see it as a project that you can start and you can finish, but of course, it might seem obvious, right? But you will have some pipelines, some things that you will need to maintain. So you need to form teams. You cannot build a project that will end and then people will go and work on their things that way they were doing beforehand. So it's an initiative. You need to structure around it. Fourth point is you need to fix data quality at the source. So we are very tempted to build in our pipelines or build in our code some edge cases. See some people laughing, and we need them to fix. They request us to fix some use cases or some problems that the data has in our pipelines. When this is not the way to go for data engineering at a scale. You need to fix the data quality issues at the source. Otherwise, you're going to be on maintenance mode for a lot of time without the ability to build on new things, and you will be stuck. Last point is that you need to invest in solving technical debt throughout the project. So as I said, you need to provide quick wins, but then you need to have the executive support so that you can invest in solving your technical debt, building libraries that for those duplicated code that you have, and keep a bit of a healthy engineering and code base, right? Otherwise, again, you will drown into your maintenance and bugs and data quality issues. So this was for the basic information architectures. But what happens when we have a multi-tenant information architecture? What happens when we want to deliver data and tooling to our different tenants? So, for example, think about this foundational data, right? So we want to provide session calculation for 16 different countries, 30 different brands. How do we do it? Another example, you want to do user segmentation on top of your user base, and you want this segmentation to be more or less a standard, and you want to compare which type of users do your brands have. So this is another example of a problem that we have solved, and that we have solved it for a multi-tenant architecture. And I will explain more on this by the end. So the challenges that we have faced is that we need to find the right level of authority, right? As I said, we have several different tenants, but also we have a global organization that needs data and reporting. So which is the right level of authority that we need to have? Second is, how do you govern the data sets? How do you make people use the data that you are providing instead of building their own things? And the third point is, which common infrastructure do you build as a platform? So let's go a little bit in detail into each one of the three. So about finding the right level of authority. So in the authority spectrum, you can find the decentralized way of working and a centralized way of working. In a decentralized organization, you have all the authority delegated to your brands, to your marketplaces. But in a centralized organization, you have the authority resides in the central teams. We have been into both, actually. So when I joined, when I joined Schibsted at that time, that later was rebranded as Adevinta, in 2013, we have silos of unreachable data. And I've said everything. So data was unreachable between the different tenants and between the global teams. So, well, the marketplaces were executing fast, but it was difficult to have a global view. And there were a lot of duplication of efforts. So we saw this, and then we changed, the organizations changed into a more centralized kind of authority. But then we had a monolithic data platform that ended up being a bottleneck. So the data was it was centralized. It can work maybe at a smaller scale, but in the scale that we were at, it was very difficult for us, and it was a bottleneck. So a little bit more of detail in the decentralization. So we have, at that time, we had a regional view of the data. So we had several Postgres databases. Some brands had a data warehouse, etc. And then on the other side, the global view was a corporate KPI database that and the communication between both of the systems, both of the views, was just an API. And this, as I said before, data silos are an obvious cause of problems. There is duplication of work, there is no reusability, etc., etc. Also, there is a global view, but it's very aggregated, so you cannot drill down by any kind of dimension or metric or anything. So when we move to the other way of the other spectrum of the level of authority in centralization, we had some sources to ingest and then some consumers. And the idea was nice, but then what we built is a big data platform that it was kind of a black box, that it was very difficult to use for the different marketplaces. And it was a slow and a bottleneck for adoption. So which is the right level of authority? We kept some things from this big data platform. Actually, we kept the physical storage. It's AWS S3. And then we moved to a federation architecture. What does it mean? It means that on one side, we have new corporate data sources like event behavioral tracking, or multiple Kafka systems that were sending data from the different marketplaces in real time to the corporate data lake, as I said, this S3 physical storage. But then we allowed the marketplaces to keep running their businesses and keep having their own local storages, their own local data warehouses, etc. But how was the communication here? And how is the communication nowadays? What we have accomplished? So we have accomplished something that we call downwards federation. So all this foundational data, all these core metrics that we have, all this user segmentation is calculated by this data engineering team globally, and then it's being used by the different marketplaces. So how we do that? So each regional data warehouse is a different Redshift instance, but we are leveraging two tools on top of that. So one is Athena, and the other one is Redshift Spectrum. So Athena is good for central teams to use. It's a single JDBC connection, and the central teams, they don't have other data to join with. So they can use Athena. It's fast. It's actually not expensive at our scale. And people is happy because it's fast and they can access S3 data at a very low level of granularity. And for our tenants, our marketplaces, we have Redshift Spectrum installed in their own Redshift clusters that allows us to provide our global data sources to them for analysis or for whatever they want to use them. So in this way, we have solved the issue of the level of authority. So again, we have some data sets that are calculated globally that the local brands can use because they are being provided via Redshift Spectrum and they can join with their own data sets. Second point, how do we do the governance part? Then this is really key and it's really important. So we have embraced the concept of the data sets as products. Okay? And it's a really interesting article that is in the slides that you can, I encourage you to check later. And this defines that a data set needs to be discoverable, addressable, trustworthy, self-describing, interoperable, and secure. And this way, you will have achieved more or less a quite good governance model of the data sets. So let's go into a bit of detail into one of these. So for the discoverability part, we have built a search engine for data sets on top of S3. So, and actually have iterated a bit on that. The first search that we had was the result of indexing all our S3 buckets and folders. This was good at the beginning, but then we didn't have at the end any kind of governance. We could search, but we didn't know what was there actually. So we switched it into kind of a whitelisting where you actively have to register your data sets and you have to provide metadata information about your data sets to be able so people then later can request access and use it. So for example, here we can see an example of a user segmentation data set that you can search, you can apply for access, and then you can start querying the data in S3 or Athena. So how do you know all this information about these data sets? So the data sets need to be addressable. So this means that at some place in your documentation, in the tool that you're using for this, you need to define which is the name of the data set, which is the Athena table that where you can find this data, and which is the S3 path where you can find this data. So this is only a part of the documentation of the data set. Then we will, in this platform, you will have a description of the fields, the schema, example data, etc. But the addressability part is very important, because this is going to make your teams more productive, because you will not get interrupted by people requesting where is this data set before having this, people went into a Slack and they said, okay, where I can find this data, right? So now we have this all documented, and you are autonomous to query the data because you know which data set to request access, how is the table named, etc., etc. So it has to be also trustworthy, and I explained that this all the different brands are in different levels of maturity, and they are in different levels of tracking implementation, and it can be that one marketplace has a better data quality than another marketplace because of they have not prioritized the tracking or whatever it is, right? So at the end, we saw that people were not using the dashboards or were not using the data because they didn't know if they could trust the data. So what we have added is several mechanisms to report in which state and which quality the data is. So we have a schema validation. We have data quality checks that you can do in several fields to assess if they are null or not, for example. That's one type. But also, and the most important one, is that we have provided contextual data quality information in our visualization tools. So we are using Tableau for this. And for example, here you can see when you hover on top of a chart that is showing the number of sessions during the year, you can see that this trend is reliable. So this is very important because the people is autonomous again to decide if they want to use the data or not for their data-driven decisions. For the self-describing aspect, as I commented before, all the data set need to include the data location. They need to include the provenance, and if there is any data mapping, you need to include information about that also. We are including example data, how often this data is being generated and executed, and how fresh it is. What are the input preconditions, and also, and very important, we have Jupyter notebooks for each one of the data sets where you can find examples of using this data set. So this has been also very key for adoption. Before having that, we were just generating the data set, and the data set was there, and then we hoped people use this data set. But we have realized that we need to put the example Jupyter notebook in our definition of DONE in our tasks so that people have this example on how to use the data set. So providing examples on how to use the data is very good when you have a multi-tenancy environment. For the interoperable part, we had to define a common nomenclature. So this is quite obvious. We had to do it in all the layers of the platform, and also for the schema part, for our tagging plans, and to define the contract between the marketplaces and our services. We are using we have a schema, and we are validating against this schema, and we are using the schema.org repository to do that. And so, for example, if you want to specify which type of an ad do you have, so it's something that you want to buy or you want to sell, or it's a job offer, etc., we are providing this set of values, and you have to use one of these. Okay? Because if not, the schema validation will not work, and it will not pass. The event will be there, but some data will be in a custom field, and it will be, the quality will not be reliable. So finally, the data set has to be secure. So as I explained in the very beginning, we have this portal where you can apply for access to a data set. So people is not granted access to everything when they join the company. We have groups and roles where they have access to a subset of the data. But then if you want to use a specific data set for a specific analysis or for a specific product, you need to apply for access to that data set. And actually, and this is because the GDPR regulation, our different tenants need to provide you the accept or reject for this request, right? The good thing is that you can you can apply on behalf of a group. You can set an expiration date of this access, because if you are doing a 1-week analysis, why should you have access for ad eternum to this data set, right? And actually, this is something that GDPR is very, it's very important for us, because we want to comply with GDPR, and we have to put expiration dates to access request, and then you have the rationale. So these are the features that we request to the data sets. And this has worked well for us to be able to provide this data for our different tenants, and they can be autonomous using this data. So finally, what common infrastructure we have built. So I explained a little bit about this search engine. This is a common infrastructure, the requesting for access, etc. But let's go a little bit more on detail on the fundamental data part. So how are we solving that problem? So in our team, we have sensed that when creating these core metrics for our business, all metric calculation follows a pattern. And this pattern is the following. So maybe you want to filter some data beforehand. Maybe you have to transform the data before aggregating it. Then you have the group by per se and the aggregation function. And then maybe you want to apply some transformation, or we give you the possibility to apply some transformation at the end of the aggregation. And also, what we have realized is that our analysts and our business users, they want to calculate all the metrics in all the possible periods available. So not only to see what happened yesterday, but also see what happened between Monday and yesterday, between the first day of the month and yesterday, during the last 7 days, or during the last 28 days. So we are providing frameworks to be able to do that very easily. So how does this look in our code? So as you can see here, we are defining a metric ID. In this case, it's counting the ads with leads. We are filtering for lead events. So a lead is when a buyer is contacting a seller to request if the product is still available, or if you can negotiate the price, etc., etc. So we want to know, we want to aggregate by these 3 dimensions, and the aggregation function is count distinct of the ad ID. So in this way, we can know how many ads on a specific period have received leads. And you can see that the period is not present here because it's in our orchestration part in Luigi. But the code is the same for any period that you want to calculate. So this configuration is then passed to this cube function in a Spark. It's a very useful function for us because it calculates all the subtotals on all the grand totals for every permutation of columns. So we have several examples of non-aggregatable metrics. So we are calculating all these aggregations and we are materializing all these aggregations in S3 so that people can use them later on. And they don't have to calculate them on their own. And actually, if we wouldn't do it like this, they couldn't do it in Tableau, for example, because the metrics are not aggregable. So at the end, the metric calculation system is very easy. You can define a list of metrics that can be calculated, and here you have several examples. For example, you can if you want to calculate how many sessions, you don't need to do any filter. You don't need to do any filter before, not any filter after. It's just the count listing of the session ID field, and then the dimensions are specified in another part of the code because they are common for all the metrics that you can find here. So this is available also for other people to use and other people to take advantage from. Another example, as I mentioned before, is the user segmentation. So we are providing user segmentation data and user segmentation functions so that people can run their own segmentation algorithm. So we are using this RFM, so recency frequency monetization pattern. And what we are doing here, this example is actually from a Jupyter Notebook, from a custom example. So our fundamental user segmentation code is different. It doesn't take into account these variables. But if you are a marketplace in Chile, you can use this code to calculate your own segmentation and change the metrics that you want to use for the segmentation to be calculated. So in this case, we are using the total number of events and the total number of sessions to calculate the monetary part, for example. It's a very simple example. It's actually not like this. So at the end, this with segment function does everything for you. And we are providing this to our tenants so that they can build their own segmentation. After that, you can map the result of this segmentation, and you can specify the names of the segments as whatever you want. Okay? So this is also very useful to provide autonomy to our teams. So what we have learned during this journey is that the federation concept has given us autonomy. Has given autonomy globally in our teams, but also has given autonomy to our marketplaces. The non-invasive governance that we have and this concept of dataset as product has been very important for us, and we are applying it to each new dataset that we are providing. And finally, we need to balance the delivery of the business value versus the tooling. So at the beginning, we were delivering the metrics themselves. But then we saw, okay, why don't we provide also the libraries for other people to use them? So once we had this rolling, our stakeholders have seen that it's also very valuable for them to have the libraries, not only the metrics itself. So that's it. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Thank you for your talk. My question was, for example, user segmentation might be useful for operational activity, for example, in CRM systems, and whose responsibility would it be to integrate it from Redshift database that is federated, and to get it from there to a CRM system?
Very nice question. We're actually in this challenge at the moment. So it's responsible of the consumer at the moment. So, for example, if one marketplace wants to automatize the result of the segmentation to and send it to a marketing automation tool or CRM or whatever, it's the marketplace owning that part. So we, as I said, we are just providing the fundamental data where all the company agrees with the definition, but then it's up to the marketplaces to use this data. That being said, we have another team that they are called the enablers team, where they help the marketplaces do this process if they don't have the resources themselves. But they usually will not end up owning any kind of cron job or something that sends this data to a CRM, etc. So for us, it's very important to focus and to keep our focus on delivering these fundamental core business metrics, and then the responsibility is on the marketplace. But globally also, we have some teams that can help the marketplaces on that.
Yes, thank you. I've got it.
Why did you choose to make the data available in Redshift and Athena?
So we started making it available in Redshift and Athena because of the visualization part. So all the aggregations that we have, we are moving them into Redshift because it's where the data visualization tools are consuming them. And having a small cluster of Redshift where, I don't know, if you have 100 people accessing dashboards, if you build this into Athena, every time that you load the dashboard, it will imply some cost, some Athena cost, because you will have to do queries, etc., etc. So for the very aggregated data, we copy it to Redshift so that the data visualization tools can consume from that Redshift instance. But then for the low-level aggregations, we are not making it available in Redshift. We are only making it available through Athena. So it depends on the granularity. You would go to Athena or you would go to Redshift.
Thanks.
Thank you for the talk. It was great. I wanted to ask you about the governance part. When you say data set as a product, whose product is that? Is that completely producer's product, or do you augment, do you introduce some responsibility on your side as a data platform? So, for example, who provides the notebooks, Jupyter notebooks as examples?
So, which data products to build is a responsibility of the business. We get the priorities from the different marketplaces or from global teams. How they have to be built is also a responsibility of the business. But then owning these core fundamental data sets, it's part of our team, and we do the Jupyter notebook. So they have to be, the Jupyter notebook has to be validated, for example, it has to be validated by our stakeholders and the people that has requested that data set. But usually it's us providing it, but there is a validation process and it can be improved through time by the people using the data set, actually.
Okay, more specifically, what would be the metadata that the producers provide?
So the metadata that the users provide would be all the filtering options and which dimensions do you need to aggregate the data, for example. One example would be, so how do you define what is a session? would be something that is defined across the company. Which events to take into account? Do sessions that click from Facebook and then bounce count as a session, or you have to be a specific set of seconds in our website? So these kind of definitions are the ones that are agreed upon all the different tenants. And then there is our team that centralizes the implementation and provides it to the rest of the organization.